The wind began its low moan through the pine trees just after midday, a warning that those who knew the mountains understood well. It was a sound that promised a change, a shift from the crisp, clear autumn afternoon to something far more dangerous. High on the rocky trail that wound its way toward the valley, a young woman named Grace guided her horse and cart with a steady hand. Her basket was filled with wool from a neighbor's farm, wool she would spin into yarn for the coming winter. She was a quiet soul, with a gentle spirit that found joy in simple things, like the way the light fell through the golden leaves or the sound of a distant bird. She hummed a soft hymn, a tune of faith and comfort as she urged the horse forward, hoping to beat the weather home. But the mountains are unforgiving, and the storm came upon the land with a sudden, furious speed. The moaning wind became a shrieking gale, tearing at the branches and whipping stinging ice crystals into the air. The world turned white, a swirling, blinding chaos that erased the path and swallowed the sun. Grace's horse, a normally calm creature, whinnied in terror, its eyes wide with fear. A loud crack of a falling branch nearby was the final straw. The animal reared, its hooves slipping on the now icy rock. The cart tilted, wood splintering, and Grace was thrown into a deep drift of snow, the world spinning as she landed with a jarring thud. By the time she struggled to her feet, the horse and broken cart were gone, vanished into the white curtain of the storm. She was alone. The cold was a living thing, seeping through her heavy cloak and dress, biting at her fingers and toes. She tried to walk to find shelter, but each direction looked the same. The wind stole her breath and her hope. She stumbled, fell, and got up again, her prayers becoming silent pleas in her heart. Just as her legs could no longer hold her and a strange, sleepy warmth began to creep over her, her foot caught on a hidden root and she tumbled down a small, unseen bank, landing in a heap against a solid wooden wall. In a small, sturdy cabin nestled in a grove of pines, a man named Travis was banking the fire for the long night. He was a woodcarver, a man of few words whose strong hands were more often used to shape delicate flowers from pine than to swing an axe. He lived a simple, solitary life, his faith his constant companion. The roar of the storm was loud, but a faint thump against his door was a sound that did not belong. He paused, listening, and heard it again, a softer sound like a sack of grain slipping to the ground. With caution, he unlatched the heavy door and pulled it open, the wind fighting him for every inch. There, half buried in the drifting snow, was a woman. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, and a dusting of ice coated her dark eyelashes. For a moment, his heart froze in his chest. Then action took over. He scooped her up as if she weighed no more than a child, carried her into the warmth of the single room, and kicked the door shut against the screaming wind. He laid her gently on the thick bearskin rug before the roaring fire, rubbing her cold hands and speaking to her in a low, calm voice, though he was not sure she could hear. "You are safe now," he murmured. "The storm cannot reach you here." It took many hours for the warmth to truly return to her. He warmed broth over the fire and helped her sip it. He gave her his own bed, a simple cot in the corner, piling it high with every blanket he owned. For himself, he took a single woolen blanket and lay down on the hard floor before the fireplace, ensuring he was between her and the door. He did this not out of coldness but out of a deep respect. He was a man of honor, and he knew her reputation was now, in part, in his hands. For 3 days the storm raged, trapping them together in the small space. He cared for her, cooked for her, and made sure she was comfortable, but he always kept a respectful distance, his manner always that of a protector, never anything more. When the sky finally cleared to a brilliant, cold blue, the world outside was buried under a deep, white blanket. Travis prepared Grace's horse, which had found its way to his lean-to, and prepared to take her home. The journey was made in near silence, the only sound the crunch of snow underfoot. When they arrived at her family's farm, her father, Mr. Barrett, rushed out, his face a mixture of relief and then, quickly, a dark storm of his own. He pulled Grace inside and listened to her story, his expression growing harder with every word. His focus was not on the miracle of her survival. It was on the 3 days. 3 days his unmarried daughter had spent alone in a woodsman's cabin. In their community, such a thing was a scandal that could stain a family's name forever. Later that evening, he marched to Travis's cabin, with Grace trailing behind him, her eyes downcast. "You have compromised my daughter," Mr. Barrett stated, his voice like iron. "There is only one path to restore her honor. You will marry her. It is the right thing to do." Travis was stunned into silence. He looked at Grace, saw the shame and misery on her face, and knew this was not what she wanted. He had saved her life only to see it shackled. But he also saw the unyielding set of her father's jaw. He was an honorable man, and he had promised God to always do what was right. To refuse would ruin Grace completely, leaving her an outcast. He took a deep breath and met Mr. Barrett's hard gaze. "I will marry her," he said, his voice low but steady. "I will be a faithful and good husband to her. You have my word." The wedding was a small, somber affair in the village church. Grace wore her best dress, but her face was pale, her smile nowhere to be seen. She felt like a leaf caught in a swift river, swept along by a current she could not fight. She repeated the vows with a numb tongue, feeling the weight of the gold band Travis placed on her finger like a chain. He, in turn, spoke his vows with a solemn gravity, promising before God and everyone to love and cherish her. After the brief ceremony, she gathered her small trunk of belongings and followed her new husband back to the cabin in the woods, the place of her rescue that now felt like her prison. That first night, Travis carried her trunk inside and then pointed to the loft above the main room. "You can have the loft," he said gently. "It is private. I will be fine down here by the fire." He had already moved his few things to a chest near the fireplace. Grace climbed the narrow ladder without a word, the silence between them as thick and heavy as the winter snow outside. She lay on the narrow cot in the loft, listening to the crackle of the fire below and the steady breathing of the man who was now her husband, a stranger who had saved her life only to have her future forced upon him. Tears of confusion and loneliness wet her pillow, and she wondered if this cold, quiet life was all that God had planned for her. The first light of dawn crept through the single window of the cabin, painting pale stripes across the wooden floor where Travis slept. He was already awake, had been for some time, lying on his bedroll and listening to the faint sounds of movement from the loft above. He rose quietly, building up the fire from embers to a warm, crackling hearth for the small home before stepping outside into the brittle cold to fetch water and wood, allowing Grace the privacy to wake and descend alone. When he returned, his cheeks red from the chill, he found her standing by the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, looking lost in the space that was now hers, yet not hers at all. Thus began the pattern of their days, a silent dance of two people sharing a cage. Grace took over the domestic duties, sweeping the floors, preparing the meals, and mending clothes with a quiet efficiency that was devoid of joy. She was a ghost in his home, a silent, beautiful shadow that flitted from hearth to table to chair, always careful to maintain a careful distance. She spoke only when necessary, her answers to his gentle questions short and polite. "The stew is ready," or, "I am going to collect the eggs." Travis, for his part, accepted this with a patience that seemed as deep and unending as the forest itself. He never pressed her, never demanded conversation, and his kindness was a constant, quiet force. He expressed his care not with words, which she seemed unwilling to hear, but through the work of his hands. One evening he presented her with a comb, carved from a piece of smooth, pale maple. It was not a crude object, but a thing of delicate beauty, its spine shaped like a winding vine with tiny leaves etched into the wood. He placed it on the table before her without ceremony, simply saying, "For you," before returning to his whittling by the fire. Grace picked it up, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. It was the first kind, unnecessary thing anyone had given her since her world had been overturned, and for a moment, her stern composure wavered. But the wall around her heart was thick, and she merely whispered a quiet thank you before placing it carefully in her trunk, a treasure to be admired but not yet enjoyed. Weeks turned into a month, and the heavy snows of deep winter settled upon the land. Travis began a new project, a larger piece of oak he had stored away. He would work on it in the evenings, his knife scraping softly, the curls of wood falling like brown snowflakes to the floor. Grace, sitting across the room with her mending, would occasionally glance up, curious, but she never asked what it was. The silence between them was a living thing, filled with unspoken words and a loneliness that clung to the cabin's logs as persistently as the cold. The need for supplies finally forced a journey into the small town. Grace was grateful for the break in the routine, for a glimpse of other faces. As Travis conducted his business at the blacksmith, a young woman with cheerful eyes and a warm smile approached her. "You must be Grace," the woman said. "I'm Lily. My family's farm is just yonder. We heard about, well, we're glad to see you looking well." Lily's friendliness was a sudden, welcome warmth. They spoke of simple things, the unending winter, recipes for preserving food, the upcoming spring planting. As they talked, Lily nodded toward Travis, who was speaking earnestly with the blacksmith. "Everyone here knows Travis," Lily said, her voice softening with respect. "He doesn't say much, but his heart is as solid as the trees he carves. He helped my pa fix our barn roof after the first snow, wouldn't take a single coin for it. Just said it was what neighbors do. Grace listened, her eyes fixed on her husband. She saw the way the other men in the street nodded to him with genuine regard, a look earned not through loud words but through quiet, consistent action. It was the first time she had seen him through the eyes of others, and the picture they painted was different from the jailer she had built in her mind. A few days after their return, a fierce coughing settled deep in Grace's chest. What started as a chill quickly bloomed into a raging fever that left her weak and shivering in the loft, her body burning one moment and drenched in cold sweat the next. The world became a blur of discomfort and fear. And through it all Travis was there. He moved his bedroll to the floor beside the loft ladder, sleeping in fits and starts so he could hear her if she called. He prepared broths and medicinal teas, helping her sip them when she was too weak to hold the cup herself. He spent hours reading aloud to her from his well-worn Bible, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of her illness. The words of Psalms and comfort from the Gospels washed over her, not as a lecture, but as a blanket of peace. One night, during the worst of the fever, she awoke to find him still there, his head bowed in prayer by the firelight, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. She could see the worry etched on his face, the genuine fear in his eyes. It was in that moment, in the deep, silent watch of the night, that the final stones in the wall around her heart began to crumble. This was not the duty of a man bound by a forced vow. This was the fierce, patient, selfless love of a true husband. He was not merely protecting her honor. He was fighting for her very life. When the fever finally broke and strength slowly returned to her limbs, the world seemed new, the cabin itself felt different. The silence was no longer cold, but peaceful. One evening as they sat by the fire after a quiet meal, she looked at him, truly looked at him, and spoke his name. Travis. He glanced up from his whittling, his eyes meeting hers without expectation. Thank you, she said, and the two words carried the weight of all the weeks of silence, all the days of nursing, all the walls that had finally fallen. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your care. A slow, gentle smile, the first she had ever seen from him, touched his lips. You are my wife, he said simply, as if that single fact explained a universe of devotion. That night, when it was time to sleep, Grace did not climb the ladder to the loft. Instead, she walked to the simple bed in the corner of the main room, the bed he had given up for her. She smoothed the blankets and then turned to him. Her voice was soft but clear in the quiet cabin. This is your bed. It is our bed. Then she went to the loft and brought down her few belongings, placing them carefully in the chest beside his. It was a simple action, but in that small space, it was a momentous shift. It was her choice. It was her vow, freely given at last. The silent dance was over, and the true music of their life together was finally ready to begin. The spring that followed was the most beautiful either of them had ever known. It was as if the entire world had been washed clean, not just of snow, but of the last remnants of the cold that had once lived between them. The cabin, once a place of silent tension, now brimmed with a warm and easy peace. Grace's gentle hum once again filled the air, no longer a sad tune but a melody of contentment, often joined by the steady, quiet scrape of Travis's carving knife. He had finally finished the large oak piece, revealing it to be a beautifully carved sign for their home. On it, he had carved their names, Travis and Grace, intertwined with blooming roses and sturdy oak leaves, a permanent testament to the love that had grown from such a rocky beginning. He mounted it proudly beside their front door, and Grace felt her heart swell every time she looked at it. Their life settled into a harmonious rhythm built on mutual care and newfound discovery. Grace learned the names of the trees Travis favored for his carvings, and he learned her favorite wildflowers, sometimes returning from a long day in the woods with a small, carefully picked bouquet for her. They worked side by side in the new garden they planted together, turning the rich, dark soil and sowing seeds for vegetables and herbs. Their conversations were no longer polite exchanges, but easy talks about their hopes for the future, their shared faith, and their memories of life before they found each other. They prayed together each morning and evening, their joined hands a symbol of a partnership that was now chosen, not forced. It was on a warm summer morning with the sunlight streaming through the open window, that Grace first shared her special news. She placed her hand gently on his arm as he prepared to go outside. Travis, she said, her voice soft with a mixture of awe and happiness. Our family, it is going to grow. The understanding that dawned on his face was a sight she would treasure forever. His strong, quiet features transformed with a joy so pure and deep that it brought tears to her eyes. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. From that day forward, his care for her took on a new, tender depth, his love already spilling over to the tiny, unseen life they had created together. The months passed in a blessed blur of preparation. Travis, with immense pride and patience, built a sturdy cradle from cherry wood, sanding it until it was silken smooth and carving a tiny, sleeping lamb on its headboard. Grace sewed soft blankets and little gowns, her stitches filled with love and anticipation. Their cabin became a nest, readying itself for the new arrival. The love that had started as a small, fragile seed in the winter snow had now deeply rooted, weathering its first storms to grow into a strong, sheltering tree. The birth of their son was a long and challenging night, but through it Travis never left Grace's side, his steady presence her anchor. And when the first strong cry of their baby finally pierced the quiet dawn, a profound, overwhelming peace settled over the small cabin. The midwife placed the swaddled infant in Grace's weary arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face, her heart overflowing with a love she had never known possible. Travis knelt beside the bed, his work-roughened finger reaching out to gently stroke the baby's soft cheek. He looked from his son to his wife, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears of gratitude and wonder. "His name is Micah," Grace whispered, a name that meant, gift from God. Travis nodded, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Grace. "I pulled you from the snow," he said softly, his words meant for her alone. "I saved you from the cold. But you, Grace, you have saved me from a life of solitude. You have filled this house with light and my heart with a happiness I never dreamed I would know. You and Micah, you are my greatest blessings on this earth." In that moment, surrounded by the love they had built, every past hardship felt like a distant memory, a necessary path that led them to this perfect, holy moment. When Micah was a year old, they bundled him up and made the journey to visit Grace's family. The farm was much the same, but Mr. Barrett seemed to have aged in a new way, his sternness softened by time and perhaps by regret. He watched as his daughter moved with a quiet confidence, her face radiant with happiness. He saw the way Travis's eyes followed her, filled with unwavering devotion, and the gentle, sure way he held his grandson. As Mr. Barrett took the cooing baby into his own arms, feeling the solid weight of the child, something in his heart shifted. He looked at his daughter, his own eyes glistening. "Grace," he began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I see now that I was wrong. I forced a contract to protect a name, but I did not understand that God was building a covenant to protect two hearts. Can you ever forgive a stubborn old man?" Grace placed a hand on his arm, her smile warm and genuine. "There is nothing to forgive, Papa," she said. "All is well." The healing of that fractured bond was the final piece of their happiness, a restoration that filled the rest of their visit with genuine laughter and the shared joy of a family made whole. That evening, as Travis guided the wagon carrying his wife and son back toward their home in the woods, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Micah slept peacefully in Grace's arms, and Travis's hand rested gently on her knee, a simple, constant touch that spoke of his love and protection. They traveled not as two strangers bound by a vow, but as one heart, one spirit, journeying through life together. They knew that storms would surely come again, for that is the way of life, but they also knew that their love, built on a foundation of patience, faith and kindness, was a shelter that would withstand any season. Their forever after had begun, not in a grand castle, but in a simple wooden cabin, built and warmed by a love that had been earned, one kind act at a time, and would last for all their days. If this story of patience and faith-filled love touched your heart, there are many more tales of hope and redemption waiting for you. We invite you to join our community of listeners by subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share stories that uplift and inspire. Subscribe now and never miss a journey toward a happily ever after.